As a career funeral service person, I have had a front row seat my entire life as to how death affects people impacted by it. I have seen unspeakable grief that I could never adequately describe, anger to God and anyone else who could be blamed for taking someone unexpectedly or too soon, and even profound relief that a loved one is out of their pain and torment, and most every other emotion you can imagine. Through all of that, I have come to know in a real way that death is a part of life. We have all experienced it in our families and have dreaded the day that is surely coming for us and for those we love. Many people do not like to talk about it, and they don't want to hear about it. They certainly don't want to visit a museum about death and funerals, or, God forbid, listen to a podcast about it. But I learned through the years that it is a healthy thing to face death and dying and our own mortality head on. I have given thousands of speeches about it and have been able to even get people to see the humor that can surround it, and talked about the fact that many of us spend most of our hours every day pursuing things that are not really important in the big scheme of things, and therefore we live as if we're going to be here forever. I know I am biased, but I've also seen firsthand the importance of funerals in our society. Sir William Gladstone said it as well as anyone. Show me the manner in which a nation cares for its dead, and I will measure with mathematical exactness the tender mercies of its people, their respect for the laws of the land, and their loyalty to high ideals. The National Museum of Funeral History was founded in 1992 in Houston, Texas by Bob Waldrop. He had a dream to establish an institution to educate the public and preserve the heritage of death care. His dream has certainly come true, and now what is over 30,000 square feet of exhibits of funeral history and thousands of visitors every year being amazed by what they see and learn. The National Museum of Funeral History is an educational experience like no other and offers something for everyone. You will discover America's largest collections of authentic historical funeral service items. The museum showcases the history and evolution of funeral customs, rituals, and traditions, and there you will be informed, enlightened, and even entertained. Their tagline is "Every day above ground is a good one." And boy, that is certainly true. But when you visit, whether in person or virtually, you will also be forced to contemplate life and death and your own beliefs, values, and mortality. And that is a very healthy thing. My guest today is the President, CEO, and Curator of the National Museum of Funeral History, Genevieve Keeney-Vazquez. There's no way she can begin to tell you all about this incredible museum in one conversation, but she will whet your appetite for it by talking about a few of the amazing exhibits and a few of the interesting relics you will find there. Are you interested in the funerals of the rich and famous? Have you seen the Shroud of Turin? Or how about a lock of Abraham Lincoln's hair? Do you know anything about restorative art? Or have you heard of a cooling board? Just hold on. Your horizons are about to be expanded.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.
This is Bruce Goddard, and you're listening to the View from a Hearse podcast. I have with me Genevieve Keeney-Vazquez, and she runs the National Museum of Funeral History in Houston, Texas. So, folks, this is going to be interesting. Genevieve, thank you for being on here. First of all, thank you for doing this and taking the time to talk to me.
Well, thank you for having me. And anytime I get a chance to talk about the museum, I am ecstatic because it is the place to visit.
Well, I have been there several times, and you're all right. It is a great place to visit, and it's a great place to visit when you don't even know you want to go there until you get there and you realize, wow, there's a lot of stuff in here. So one of the things that always got my attention, Genevieve, is The tagline is "Any day above ground is a good one." And boy, that is true. That's the way I see life.
Well, Mr. Bedecker, he actually had come across it one time back in the day. And he said, that is, like you just said, true, that any day above ground is a good one. And it's something that we all need to kind of ponder on. And it kind of leads to the fact that we all will one day die and be in the ground or cremated, however you choose. But back in let's say, talk about 50 years ago, it probably was mostly in the ground. So you always want to be above the ground. And so Mr. Bedecker found that to be quite fascinating and thought that it was a very fun yet applicable tagline to the museum, and really gets people to ponder and think and hopefully have a greater sense of appreciation for life, knowing that death is around the corner.
Yeah, one of the things I've learned in my life and in my career, it's okay to lighten up. It's okay to lighten up when you're talking about death, when you're talking about serious things. There's a fine line between laughing and crying, and this just makes you smile. And it's pretty cool when you're going into a museum of funeral history to have a smile on your face when you get started. It's just very cool to me, for sure. So, Genevieve, talk about you a little bit. Let's be sure we understand who you are. How long have you been there, and a little bit about how you got to where you are.
So I started out before my journey to the museum began when I was a student at Commonwealth Institute of Funeral Services, which shares the same building as the museum. And they needed some volunteers to help out in the museum from time to time. And I was always that overachiever, go-getter kind of person, raised my hand and said, I'll help. So with that being said, I got to know the staff of the museum, who was Mr. Bedecker, the president at the time, and Lucy Gonzalez, who was the this manager and basically was running it. And she and Bob and I, we got along very well. I began helping them in more and more projects. And then there was this huge expansion getting ready to happen. They were going to be expanding the museum and adding a huge exhibit, which is the Celebrating the Lives and Deaths of the Pope. And I ended up, for my final project for my my degree in funeral services, was the restorative art portion of it. I chose St. Pope John Paul II, and I replicated his features and put myself to the test. And if people couldn't recognize this renowned figure, then I wasn't good at restorative art. And so I did that, and unbeknownst to me, that ended up being part of my resume in the fact that I had this attention to detail, and I also had this artistic talent, which in turn led me to being the project manager over the expansion of this exhibit and helping oversee the fine details of the construction as well as the exhibit designing. And we had 8 other exhibits that we were rearranging at the exact same time. And so that is kind of how it all began. I started out as the director and project manager, and today, 18 years later, I'm the president and CEO and curator of the museum.
Well, I know people are wondering, and I'm going to ask you the question, how did you replicate the Pope's features? I know people want to know. That's amazing.
Yeah, so when you're taking the studies to become a mortician, licensed funeral director, and embalmer, restorative art is one of the classes that we have to take. And we're taught how to restore features of the face, because when you're viewing your loved one, 2 of the most important things that we as funeral directors have to pay most attention to is the hands and the face, because that is the lasting impression that the loved ones will focus in on or touch. And so we always want to make sure those 2 features are as close to resemblance of their loved one as possible, especially if those features get distorted from an illness or a tragic accident. So we always want to try and recreate those. So we're taught how to recreate an ear and an eye, a nose, mouth. We are taught the measurements, taking the original measures of that person's face and breaking it down so that we can get them as close to their original features as possible. And so we're given a plastic skull on a base, and then we're given a jar of wax. And it's with the wax and the skull. They said, okay, here now, create your person, whoever you choose. And I decided to put myself to the test. And it was the year he died in 2005. And so thankfully, I had access to a lot of photos from magazines, and so I got my hands on People magazine and the National Enquirer, whatever magazine was on the newsstand at that time that had pictures of him from different angles. I grabbed those because the internet wasn't as developed as it is now, and so basically by all different pictures. And understanding the measurements. If I could only get one side of his face, that's all I needed, because then I could take the measurements and be able to replicate the other side of his face. So it was all done by photos. And so
I got a feeling that, and I remember when I was in mortuary school decades ago, I had the same plastic skull and a jar of wax. But I have a feeling you were a lot better at that than I was. But, people don't realize the training that people go through. And another thing they don't realize, because obviously I've had a lot of those instances where you do restorative art because you have to, because like you said, of illness or accident or whatever. And it means a lot through my career to that family to have a different picture than what they could have if we were not able to do that. So it's almost a little bit of a lost art, really. But you obviously very good at it to do what you did. So I want to go back and let's talk about why someone should visit this museum. Just why should the general public, somebody that's not even in the funeral business, obviously if you're in the funeral business, you certainly want to do it, but other people, why would they find this interesting?
Well, for myself, and I think for others as well, I don't have a problem speaking about death. Death is my life. It's been that way my entire life. But I think there's some people that really, truly have, I call it a morbid curiosity. They want to know what goes on behind the closed doors, per se. And within our profession, unless you're in it or around it, there's still a lot of mystique that goes into caring for the dead that people aren't aware of. It's not publicized, obviously, because we have laws that protect that. And people aren't going to just walk into your neighborhood funeral home and say, "Hey, can I take a look around? Can you tell me more about what goes on behind the scenes?" Perhaps they've lost a loved one, and there's some unanswered questions, or their children are coming up of age where death is starting to become a concept of life that they're aware of, but yet they have a fear of. And how does the parents explain that to them? So the museum is like this neutral environment to take all of these different aspects of curiosity or wanting to learn more or know more about our profession, and do it in a way that is very educational and presents it in a way that it's not standoffish, it's not frightening, but more so it's inviting, it's embracing, and it's saying, you know what, this is a part of life, and this is the best place to come in and learn more about it. Mr. Waltrip, who passed away this year, God rest his soul, our chairman emeritus, he founded it when he began his concept of consolidating resources and growing his family firm. He realized that there was a lot of items that represented the history of our industry, embalming tables and embalming tools, the hearses, just items that were very significant and tools of our trade were being discarded in the landfill. Because what are you going to do with a cooling board that once held a dead body? What are you going to do with the tools that were once used on it? Unless you had a niche of interest in this stuff, or you had family history in this stuff, it really had no place in society to be viewed or used as an instrumentation of learning. So it was just discarded. And
I'm smiling at the word cooling board. That most people listening to this won't have a clue what that is, and I happen to. My family started in 1866 in this business, and I remember having a cooling board that you folks, you took it to the house, and that's what you did, the preparation of the human body at the home.
Exactly. And then people probably are wondering why the term cooling board. And to elaborate on that is basically a lot of times people will die of what we call an agonal fever, a fever that presents prior to death. And if you're introducing our embalming chemicals into a body that still has a very high temperature to it, it'll alter the chemical compounds and the way that chemical reacts to the body. So it's important that you put them on this cooling board that has holes in it, basically, kind of like if you envision like a weaved basket, and then the normal room air temperature can now flow around the body, and thus reducing the temperature of that body to room air, making it safe to introduce the chemicals to. Right. And that's where the term cooling board came from. And that's just basically to cool the body back to room temperature so that we can do our job.
And that was a long time ago. People don't do that in homes anymore, but
no.
But this business has changed. The industry's changed. Folks, we listen to Genevieve Keeney-Vazquez. We're going to be right back. She's got some interesting exhibits in here that will make your mouth fall open as you look. So stay tuned. You've got, a couple of dozen of permanent exhibits. Talk about some of the exhibits you got.
Yeah, we have a large array of permanent exhibits. We have the Thanks for the Memories. We have the presidential. We have the history of cremation, the history of embalming. We have the International Hall, which has some different customs and traditions from around the world, with the Japanese hearse, which is very ornate and beautiful, by the way. We also talk about the Latin American holiday, the Dia de los Muertos, otherwise known as the Day of the Dead. So we have a lot of fascinating permanent exhibits, as well as celebrating the lives and deaths of the Pope, and our most recent exhibit, the most famous burial of all time, the Shroud of Turin. That's just to name a few.
Yeah, I know. What is the most popular exhibits? What do people talk about the most?
To be honest with you, I think our exhibits are seasonal. Around Easter time, the Shroud of Turin is very, very popular. Just recently, I would want to say around 2020, 2021, the history of cremation became very popular because of the unfortunate COVID-19 pandemic. It really, I think, put cremation in a different tone or a different light, where it was talked about more and it was practiced more. So I think that exhibit now has increased its visitorship in wanting to understand more about cremation and what it entails and what are the options if I do choose cremation.
I remember Abraham Lincoln's a replica of his casket, and there's a whole display there. Just talk about that one, for instance, and other ones that just people will be interested to see.
Yeah, so Abraham Lincoln, he is within our presidential exhibit, and we have every president that has died to date, going all the way back to George Washington being our first president. And Abraham Lincoln, I always say, he occupies the most real estate in our presidential exhibit, rightfully so, because he was our first president to ever have a state funeral, as well as he was our first president to ever be embalmed. His death obviously was something that was, felt nationwide, as is anytime we have the death of a president, it becomes a national process of affecting the people in America. So we showcase actual items that are from their funeral, from the newspapers, the headline news that, obviously announced the death of the president, to Abraham Lincoln's replica of his coffin, that we have that on display. And we also have a miniature replica of his funeral train. I love telling the young children about the funeral train that I liken it to Air Force One back in the day. Now Air Force One is a plane. Back then, Air Force One was a train. And the kids find that very fascinating. And rightfully so, the fact that that became his funeral train, unfortunately, because he was assassinated before ever being able to utilize it during his actual presidency, the way he was hoping to do. So they had to re-outfit it and make it his funeral train. There was always a fun fact. So if you listen to this podcast, you come to the museum and you get asked the question by a tour guide, you'll know the answer. Abraham Lincoln did not ride the train alone. He actually was accompanied by his son, Willie, who preceded him in death by 3 years. His wife had requested that his body be exhumed and ride with his dad. So I think that's a fascinating fact that so many Americans don't know.
Yeah, so you're going to learn this very interesting stuff. I know you have, I guess the most recent president was George H.W. Bush, right? And
correct.
So talk about a little bit about that exhibit, just so people can understand what they would see.
Yeah, so George H.W. Bush, of course, being from Texas, we ensured that we had a really nice space for him to put the funerary items and or items of significance to President George H.W. Bush. And so you'll actually get to see the train, the train procession of his funeral from Houston all the way to College Station. There's a nice map, an actual lit map that shows you that route, and I think it's quite fascinating. So I have the actual uniform that was worn by the military clergy as well as the priest that presided over his funeral. And we also have the memorial folder and some of the other significant stationary items that were present at his funeral. So very interesting exhibit for those of us that obviously took witness to either being there or seeing it on television. It's nice going into the museum itself and seeing these artifacts once again.
Yeah. So, folks, again, I'm speaking to Genevieve Keeney-Vazquez. She's the president, CEO of the National Museum of Funeral History in Houston, Texas, and we're going to be right back. You're going to hear about some things that are in this museum that you'd be a little bit surprised about. Okay, so let's talk about, you got I think I read, you have Robin Williams boots. Talk about that and talk about some interesting artifacts that you have that people would be interested in when they visit the museum.
Yeah, so we have this fascinating exhibit. It's called Thanks for the Memories. And this one really showcases the memorial folders of famous people, people who are iconic people who are iconic to us for their talents, be it a politician or a musician, an inventor, an author. And we have this amazing display of these memorial folders. And with it, sometimes we are able to obtain significant items of that actual person that either they used in their life or was present during their funeral. And we have it all well displayed in this exhibit called Thanks for the Memories. And one of those items we have are the boots that Robin Williams wore in the movie RV. Those are on display. We also have the crypt front of Marilyn Monroe, one of her original crypt fronts from her burial place in California. And we also have some...
You got a little bit of Lincoln's hair, right?
Yes, in the presidential exhibit, we do have a very small lock or a little snippet of Abraham Lincoln's hair that you can see on display. We also have the memorial folder to the man who invented Doritos, and forgive me for not remembering his name, but
folks, you can Google it right now. Go Google the man that invented Doritos. I love it.
I found it fascinating because, when I began designing this exhibit with Mr. Bedeker, we had all these memorial folders, and before we had these memorial folders on display in cases, and I think after a while they become very redundant and a little bit numb to the viewing process of them because it was quite boring. And so we thought, how can we revamp this, and how can we really make a memorial folder interesting to look at? And that's when we recreated the exhibit, Thanks for the Memories. And when I was going through the different memorial folders, sometimes I would come across somebody I'd never known or didn't recognize, and I would look them up, and I said, I cannot believe this is the creator of Doritos. I just remembered just finding that fascinating, that I had the memorial folder of the creator of Doritos.
And that's my point. People walk through there and you're surprised at just the interesting stuff you will find. It's all wrapped around somebody's life and how they contribute to society and their death, and which, to be honest, in a lifelong career in this business, it makes me a little sad. It makes me a little nervous that we're moving away from the public is moving away from this whole funeral concept of all these things where you celebrate somebody's life, you remember the deceased, you honor them, you all the things that go with that. It's all changing. Genevieve, I was this morning updating, since I retired a couple of years ago, I'm on like findagrave.com often, and I noticed I'm not the only one on there. There's a
there's a lot of people looking for the grave sites.
Yeah, so that is unbelievable how many contributions are on there, how many people have loaded a grave site. So I know people are interested in this. If they're going online to look at somebody's grave, to go in and find the stuff you would find here is a whole different animal, and it is very neat. Whether you're in the funeral business or never been in it, it is not only educational, but there's a lot that will make you smile. There's a lot that will be very educational as to this whole history of the funeral service, really. So it's good stuff. So talk a little bit, Genevieve, about comments you hear from people that you obviously, people can visit this place in person. And I'm going to, before we get off here, let's give the address of where it is and all that. But and then you can also visit online in some degree, right? So talk about a little bit about what you hear from people that come through there.
Yeah, so to your fact, they can visit in person, but we also now have a virtual tour that they can access online. So they can visit the museum from wherever they are in the world. But I have to say that 9 times out of 10, and I really wish I had a quarter for every time I heard it, because I would be a lot further in my financial goals. But the most common comment is, wow.
Right.
Wow, I did not expect to see all of that I saw. Or wow, there was a lot of information in there that I never knew existed. Just, it's always a wow, and then they tell me why it's a wow. And a lot of it is that they're fascinated by how their concept is so shifted. Once they went in with a preconceived notion of what we are or what we represent, because we're the National Museum of Funeral History, they walk out being completely upside down in their concepts and thought processes, because we're not what people think we are, and we're so much more. And I think that that's probably the most common vibe, reaction, and wording that I get when people leave.
And I've had that exact, and I've been there several times over the years, but I can tell you, and it changes, and from I first saw it 25 years ago or something, it's changed a lot, but it's wow. Well, that's unbelievable, that what you learn and what you see, and just the wow factor. I agree 100%. That's what happens to me when I'm there. That is for sure. So, and
you're in the industry, and the fact that I was able to wow you is a feather in my cap.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you've got surprises. I mean, there's some things that you're captivated by watching, but there's these little surprises that you see that will make you say wow a lot of times. This is not one wow when you leave. I can tell you, there's a lot of wows walking through that. That is for sure.
And it's truly impossible for me to talk about every little nook and cranny that's in that exhibit and every little item that's within every exhibit space itself. I can tell you now what we've talked about is maybe a tenth of what the museum has to offer.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And all we want to do is whet the appetite to let people know this is here, this is amazing, and it's worth taking a look. If you want to have your horizons expanded, you can have them expanded at the National Museum of Funeral History, that is for sure, and be thoroughly entertained at the same time. So, do you have people still donate articles to this? There may be people listening to this, I've got something they may want or whatever. Talk about how that works.
Yeah, a lot of time if people are interested in donating an article, I always encourage them to reach us at contact@nmfh.org. That is our email address to reach us, and then also to submit photos of the item. Keeping in mind that not all items we're able to take because we're spatially challenged.
Sure.
We're hoping to be able to expand our footprint of space in the future so that we are able to perhaps bring in more items and or have more traveling exhibit opportunities. So I always encourage people reach out to us through our email address, as well as send photos of the item that you're interested in donating, and then we can let you know whether we're able to accept the item or not. The website is www.nmfh.org. Our email address is contact@nmfh.org.
Okay, contact@nmfh.org. You also do a podcast that I think you got an episode going out once a month. Talk about that a little bit and what that's about so people can hook up with that.
So this was our first year of ever doing our podcast. It's called The Final Curtain Never Closes. And I always try to find fascinating guests to bring on, whether it's talking about the profession itself or talking about personal experiences that people have that may resonate with our listeners. I've had Barbara Camus, who's one of our board members, as well as the executive director of the Cremation Association of North America. I've had Cody Lepowski on. He is the president of Commonwealth Institute of Funeral Services. So I've had authors on my podcast, again, different people from the industry on my podcast. Actually had my husband on our podcast after the loss of a dear friend of his and the impact it has had on him. He felt the need to let people understand that the grief and how it affects men.
Wow.
And I thought that was very powerful because a lot of times men don't like to talk about their grief.
Right.
And my husband understands the importance of my work in educating the public, not only about death, but the effects that grief can have on one's life. And so he was right in line with my mission and said that he would, get on the podcast and bare his soul per se about the loss of his friend and the impact it had on him. And we're actually having a follow-up in January because, as we all know, grief is a process.
Sure.
And it has phases. And he has transcended into another phase where he feels like he has more information that he can provide listeners. So, like I say, I have a gamut of different, people, and I try to bring on different individuals who can really help resonate with listeners. The month of December, I had the founder of Wreaths Across America on because I found it fascinating that, it's the holiday season and, there's this one day around the nation that people may not understand or know or even be aware that wreaths are laid on national cemeteries all at the same time as much as possible. And it's coordinated nationwide, and it was fascinating to talk with the founder of Wreaths Across America. So, and if there's any listeners that feel like there's a topic that they find that they want to be heard, would love for them to reach out and share with me their concept and their idea, and let's see if they're willing to be on the podcast. I'm always looking for guests, as I'm sure you are as well.
Absolutely. So we talked about and I'm going to go back just a second because you can do this. You can come to the museum, which is the best way to experience this for sure. But you can also do it virtually, where you can anywhere in the world can log on. One of the things that I know you've got a big collection of that we didn't mention is the hearses. You got hearses. How many hearses do you have in there?
I think we've managed to house 19.
Got 19 hearses from different countries, different time and place. It's incredible, just that. So to see that virtually is good. To see it in person is better. But talk a little bit about how they get on, how do they get there, the address, and how to log on the web.
So if you're interested in visiting the museum in person, we are located in the north part of Houston. Many people think that we're in the museum district, but we're not. We're in the north part of Houston. We're at 415 Barron Springs Drive, Houston, Texas, 77090. Our phone number is 281-876-3063 if you need help getting directions. We also are conveniently located near the international airport, Bush International Airport. So if you find yourself on a very long layover, call you an Uber, come down, visit the museum, and head back to the hotel. It's a wonderful layover opportunity. And then we also can be found on our website at www.nmfh.org, where you can get a glimpse of some of the exhibits, obviously just through perusing the website. We have an awesome e-commerce store that has unique gifts that you can buy that funeral professional in your life, or for that somebody that has everything. We always have those cute eclectic gifts. Or you can listen to our podcast that we have once a month.
Wonderful. So Genevieve, conclude with a little personal word from you as the president and CEO, a little advertisement here about, I think you've done it, but I'll let you sum it up again, okay?
Yes. So, the National Museum of Funeral History is the largest museum in the world of funerary items. It truly is the one place that you can come and learn almost anything and everything about death, life, and the profession that cares for the dead and respects those that's been left behind. So if you ever find yourself wanting to know more about the other side of life, I challenge you to visit the National Museum of Funeral History.
Folks, you just listened to Genevieve Keeney-Vazquez, President and CEO of the National Museum of Funeral History. Genevieve, thank you so much for being on here with me today. This has been great. I think people are going to find this very interesting. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.